Welcome everybody to this video on nesting loops in Python. This is talking about, of course, putting loops inside of other loops. So the first thing to look at is we want to check what's the reason, why do we want to put loops in other loops? So when we talk about nesting loops, we're talking about when we want to run our inner loop, our nested loop, multiple times in a row. So in other words, we want to put it in another loop so that it will run multiple times according to how many times our outer loop runs. So let's look at a first example of this. What I'm going to look at is first an example of what happens if, for instance, we want to run a specific loop the amount of times that a user gives us. So what I'm going to do is ask the user to enter a number. I'm going to save that into a variable num2, which I have converted to an integer so that I can use it in a range. Then I'm going to use for num in range for num2. Now keep in mind, if I don't specify a stopping or step, the number that I put in there is the amount of times that my for loop will run. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do from there is I'm then going to run the inner part that I want to do. So the inner part is I want to ask for a name from the user. So I'm going to ask them to enter a name, and I'm going to save that variable or store it into the variable name. Then I'm going to make my counter set to 0. The reason for this is I want to count something inside of this name. And then the second part here is I'm going to use my second for loop in order to do this counting. So I'm going to have a for loop that goes through the characters in the name. So this will go through characters one by one. So if they give me, for instance, a name such as Alice, it will go through the letters A-L-I-C-E. What I want to check for is there an L in the word, or more specifically, the name? If there is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the counter by 1. So in other words, what I'm checking is how many L's are there in the name that I'm given. Now, because I want to do something with this counter, you'll notice that before I set the 0 inside of here, this means for every single name I'm resetting the counter back to 0. I only want to know the amount of L's in each name, which means that I have to do something with these before my loop ends. So, before I get to the outside of our outer loop, while our first loop is ended, I'm going to print out the counter. So this means my first loop is ended, since this lines up with the for loop. It is not inside of it anymore. It will run as soon as the nested loop is finished, but it will also run before our outer loop completes an iteration and goes back. This way I am able to do something with the counter before I reset it back to 0. Okay, and this is just one example of why you might want to nest something inside of another loop. We're going to look at another example here. So what this is going to do is I have for num in range 11. So this means this will run 11 times. It's from 0 to 10, because remember 11 is excluded. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another loop inside of it. This loop, though, is going to go from 0 to the current number in the range I'm at, plus 1. This is because I don't want to start at 0, because if I start at 0 the first time through, it's not going to do anything. I want to start counting from 0, and I want to print out all of the numbers from 0 to the current number I am in inside my outer range. Okay? We've nested this because we want to run each time for each number. So what I'm going to do is, for each of those numbers, I'm going to print them. So I'm going to print num2, and then I put here end equals, and I put an empty string. This is because I want to print these numbers on the same line. Okay? Now, outside of this loop, I'm going to put a print statement with nothing inside of it. This is because after I am finished all of these numbers from the range, or from that number in the range, I want to move down to the next line, and then come back and do it again for the next number in the range, etc. So I'm going to run both of these just to kind of show them. It's going to ask for a number, such as 2. Then it's going to ask for a name, such as Alice. It will output that there is 1 L in Alice, and then it'll ask for another name, such as Mill. It will output that there are 2 L's in Mill. Notice how it asks for 2 names since my original loop has a range of 2 because of my input. Then it will be followed by our triangle structure going from 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, all the way to 0 to 10. And what this has done, you'll notice, is it went from 0 to 1, then 0 to 2, then 0 to 3, then 0 to 4. Remembering, of course, that all these, that number was excluded, so the 4 is not there. Then 0 to 5, 5 is excluded, 0 to 6, 6 is excluded, etc. All the way until 0 to 11, where 11 was excluded. Now remember, each line was my nested loop, my outer loop just made it so that that number increased by 1 and made it so that there's a new line between each of these series of numbers. Okay? And this is some of the reasons why we might use nested loops. We're just thinking about doing something multiple times. Sometimes it changes, sometimes it doesn't.